I recently picked up my first ever luxury watch, and well, it was fake. Today I'll tell you the story, how I even spotted that it was a fake, how you can avoid buying fake watches, and well, did I get my money back? So before we get into the actual watch that I bought and what was wrong with it, let me tell you a little story about why I decided to pick up my first luxury watch. So I've been collecting watches for almost 3 years now. I first got into watches back in 2020. At first, I'm sure like many of you, I had no idea what I was doing. I was buying anything and everything that I saw. So my first mechanical watch was the Vostok Amphibia. It was a great way to dip my toe into the world of watch collecting without breaking the bank. At the time, you could pick them up from Russia for around £50. It was truly fascinating to see the second hand slowly ticking around the dial, as my previous watches had all been quartz. Slowly though, naturally, I looked for what's next. My next big purchase was the Tissot Automatics 3. This was my first Swiss mechanical watch. Picking up this Tissot was the first time that I spent over £100 on a watch. I managed to snag this one up for a bit of a bargain really. I picked it up from Joma Shop for around £150. I still absolutely love this Tissot to this day. It's not only absolutely beautiful, but with its 39mm case and the 9mm thickness, it's flawlessly comfortable. I still use this as my main dress watch to this day. I came to the realization that I was missing something important from my collection. I didn't own a chronograph. Choosing exactly which one to buy was a little difficult. I wanted something that looked sporty, had a great history behind it, and the wearing dimensions that would fit my wrist. That's when I stumbled upon the Yema Rallygraph, a stunning racing chronograph with a rich history and a 39mm case. This was the first time I dropped £300 on a watch. After the Yema Rallygraph, I started to be interested in vintage watches. I found that there was a ton of value when looking at the second-hand market over brand new releases. That's when I picked up the Christopher Ward Malvern 595, a manual wind dress watch with a ridiculous thickness. This was my first experience with a watch that actually retailed for £600. However, again, I managed to snag a bit of a deal and picked it up for around £200. The quality was high, and the movement visible through the case pack was beautiful. I got pulled back into new watches when I was sucked into the hype of the release of the Tissot PRX. I didn't own a sports watch and thought to myself, how can I possibly be a watch collector and not own a sports watch? So I picked up the green quartz variant, and for a while I was happy. I mean, the PRX is a great looking watch. The bracelet is sharp, and overall the design is great. After a while though, I found that I didn't really enjoy the fit. The extended lug-to-lug made it feel a little bit awkward on my wrist sometimes, and I found myself wearing it less and less. Finally, my last big purchase was the Oris Big Crown 3. I really wanted to get a watch from the Oris brand. Models like the Pointer Date and the Aquis were watches that I thoroughly enjoyed the look of. Browsing eBay one day, I stumbled across the BC3, and I thought it was perfect. A smaller sized pilot watch with an automatic movement by a brand that I wanted to try out. So I picked it up for around £250. Again, a watch that originally retailed for around £800. This one really opened up my eyes to vintage watches, as this Oris was from the early 2000s but still kept very good time and was in great condition. So that is just a brief story of my watch collection journey so far. Of course I picked up lots of different watches here and there also, but those were kind of the main staples, the big decisions that I made. So here is my completed affordable watch collection, featuring 13 watches, ranging from Casios to my vintage pieces too. I realised one thing though, my taste in watches began to change. I stopped looking at the super affordable picks and wanted to try out something big. I wanted to experience what a luxury watch was like. So I went through my collection, one piece at a time, and decided which ones I didn't mind letting go. I calculated that if I sold half of my collection, I could pick up my first ever luxury watch. So I began the process, selling the watches that either didn't get much wrist time or the ones that I could make some profit on. Now that brings us to just recently, where after selling half of my collection, it was time to find the watch that I wanted. There was a few brands that I really wanted to try out. The first being Omega, the second being Tudor, and the third being Breitling. I found various models that I liked that fit my budget, but one in particular really caught my eye. That being the Breitling Colt Ocean A17350. This is a 38mm dive watch with 500 meters of water resistance. Overkill, I know, but very cool to have nonetheless. Breitling is one of my favorite brands in the watch world. An incredible history in aviation reputation and still an independent watchmaker to this day. The size of the watch is also perfect for my tiny wrists. The dial layout is unique and stylish, and I love the stainless steel bezel. It's a dive watch that looks like nothing else you can find around, which I like very much. So this is the watch that I picked up, the Breitling Colt Ocean. You might have noticed that it's a bit beaten up, a bit scratched. That meant that the price was a little bit lower than the average market price, which I didn't mind because I planned to send it off for a polish anyway. So I have it. After years of collecting, picking up tons of different watches, finally I consolidated down and picked up my first luxury watch. However, this is where it all went wrong. Now this Breitling isn't a complete fake. The case, style, hands, bracelet, they were all real. But one thing I know you should absolutely do when picking up a vintage watch is check the movement. So I did. It was a bit of a pain taking off the case back without the correct tool, but I did it in the end. And when I popped the case back off, my heart dropped. I know that the movement that should be inside the Breitling is the Breitling B17 movement. This is an ETA 28242 automatic movement that Breitling individually upgrades. They take apart the movement, finish all the bridges and base plates, polish parts and regulate the movement to meet chronometer standards. So it was to my horror that inside my first luxury watch ever was a standard ETA 28242 movement without any finishing. At first I thought maybe Breitling released some of these models without finishing. Maybe a certain year or reference came without the B17. So I did my research, and no, it should absolutely have the B17 inside of it. So I was puzzled. Somebody had taken an original Colt Ocean case, hands, dial and so on, and put inside of it a standard off-the-shelf ETA movement. Of course, in the watch world, especially the luxury watch world, non-original parts mean that the watch is usually considered fake, especially with movements. Some movements can fetch a pretty penny just on their own. For example, the genuine Breitling B17 movement would cost a fair amount to purchase. Therefore, a standard ETA movement inside of my Breitling dramatically reduces the value of it. So not only is the watch considered a fake in the watch world, but I absolutely overpaid for a watch that had a standard ETA movement inside that you can find in the likes of an entry-level Tissot. I was heartbroken. My first ever luxury watch, and I was sold a non-genuine piece. Of course, I got in contact with the seller and told him that I would like to return the watch. I explained to him what I had found, and he claimed that it had been that way since he bought it around 10 years ago. Of course, I don't believe this, but hey, he accepted the return and I got my money back, luckily. But there are some massive lessons we must learn from this experience. There is one thing that I always advise when purchasing a watch second-hand. You must only ever buy from a trusted seller. No matter how good the deal might be, how much of a bargain you might think it is, you have to make sure that the seller can be trusted. In my case, I did this. The seller of the watch had 2,500 feedback with a 100% positive rating. Still though, this happened, which just goes to show that even when being careful, people can still deceive us. I believe that the only reason I got my money back from this situation is because the seller wanted to keep his reputation of 100% positive feedback. After all, if he did take my money and run, his account would be permanently suspended. So here we are, my advice to you. When buying secondhand, be very careful. Study every photo, video, every detail. Read about the watch, ask for information, do your due diligence, because you might not get as lucky as me and get your money back. As for me, well, I'm still in search of my first luxury watch. I did enjoy how the Breitling wore, and I certainly loved the look of it too. I'll be looking for another model that will hopefully have a genuine movement inside of it. This time though, I'll be asking the seller for a photo of the movement. If you liked this video, then I highly recommend you watch my video here on screen on 10 British watch brands that you should know.